Welcome to another episode of The Wolf of Wyn Street. Joining me today is Nick Welby. Nick, you've been a Chief Procurement Officer, you've been a CEO, you've been an Executive Partner at Gartner. I want to start with your time at Imperial Tobacco, where you managed multi-billions of spend. What was that like?
Well, nice to be here, Sergei, and thank you for having me on the podcast. It was an interesting time. When I joined Imperial, it was to build procurement. So I was recruited as the first sort of enterprise-wide CPO. And we didn't have multi-billions. Procurement had largely looked after factory procurement at the time. Some indirects. My remit was to get my arms around the spend and actually start to look at what did the enterprise have in those multi-billions. And I guess what was interesting was that we found a lot of the same things, a lot of duplication across different areas. But also I think one of the things is people talk about, you've got multi-billions. I didn't have multi-billions. The organization had multi-billions. My role was to understand what we had and actually drive procurement to deliver the best value for the money that we were spending. So it was an interesting time. The multi-billions took a few years to get hold of.
I bet. And really unusually, you actually managed IT as part of your organization. Why is that so weird? And have you ever seen that in any other company?
I haven't. And it took about 4 years to do that. I'd gone in, built procurement. I had a change of boss, went to work for our CFO, and was asked, would I be interested in looking after and perhaps transforming IT in the same way that we'd built procurement to be an organization-wide function. I'm not an IT guy. I didn't know about IT. The challenge wasn't really an IT challenge, though. It was a leadership challenge. So you're correct. It's not normal that a CPO then goes and has IT as a function. It was really about a leadership challenge and driving the change across the organization. The joke I always say is that, they gave IT to the guy that knew nothing about IT because they gave it to me, but it really was leadership and not technical ability.
So literally there was no chief information officer or head of IT that ran that separately from your department. All of IT sat with you.
No, we had a CIO, and the CIO ended up working for me. And we were looking to transform procurement we'd built across the enterprise. So as far apart as New Zealand, through Asia, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Central America, IT was still pretty fragmented. And that was largely as a result of Imperial's history, where we'd grown through acquisition. So we bought companies we hadn't truly synergized. And IT, we got a lot of fragmentation, we got a lot of duplication in vendors, and we got a lot of IT vendors that were the same in different countries on different contracts. So there was some synergy there about how could we drive IT and drive some value out of IT, and hence why it was a reasonably natural fit in terms of what we were going to try and do with IT that we'd done with procurement.
Tobacco is a very highly regulated, reputationally sensitive industry. How did that shape how you then ran procurement?
I'd also worked in life sciences, which has a lot of similarities in its regulation. It's just about being thoughtful in the way you contract. We would need to think about the vendors that we would be asking, because people, because of the stigma of the industry, wouldn't necessarily want to work with the industry. You've also got to think about when you place contracts, what does that mean? And managing the reputational risk as well. We had a lot of detractors just because of the nature of the industry. So people are always looking at what you do and trying to pick through agreements and deals. So it was just being very mindful and very thoughtful in how we approached the sourcing and how we managed the vendors that we actually had.
So stepping back a little bit from the multi-billions of spend that you managed at Imperial, how did you get to that point in your career? Because you didn't start out managing several billions, did you?
I didn't. I'm actually an engineer by degree. And like many people sort of my age, I think you fall into procurement, and I fell into it. I had to do a year out at university, didn't quite know what to do, wanted to use engineering, but wanted to be a bit more commercial, and ended up going to work for Hewlett-Packard in their purchasing function. And I think for the profession, back then it was purchasing, as opposed to what we see today, which is procurement. Quite liked it. Went back, finished a degree, thought, this purchasing thing, I'll perhaps try and make a career of it. Was fortunate, went to work for Toyota, had 10 years at Toyota. And if you want an early career in procurement, there was no better company than Toyota for the education it gave you. So I was then in the profession, and it just went from there. A friend of mine was the chief procurement officer at a company called Gallagher. I went to work for Gallagher and just progressed through my career and through the profession.
For anyone who's not sure what the difference is between procurement and purchasing, could you explain it?
Yeah. So for me, I know you use those words very intentionally. Purchasing is about, managing the bottom line, managing the spend, delivering the contracts, delivering the value. Procurement is about the strategic side of what we do. And I talk a lot about the value that procurement brings. It's not all about the price and the negotiation on the costs. It's about how is procurement supporting the business? What is it doing in terms of, if you're an innovation business, driving innovation? If you're in a healthcare, life sciences, how are you managing reputation? So I very much differentiate between purchasing as the bottom line, managing the contracts, and procurement, which is about adding value to the business that you're working in.
Do you see a lot of procurement roles being called procurement, whereas actually they're just purchasing?
I think it differs. I still think people use the words interchangeably.
Is that okay?
It can be. I once got asked, which procurement function do you want to be? And I think the reality is you have to be the right purchasing function or procurement function for the business you're working in. And that's about the chief procurement officer working across the exec to get alignments on what does procurement in this company really need to deliver. So I can't give you a black and white, and I still think that's a challenge for the profession, by the way. We've got lots of different names. We've got buying, we've got purchasing, we've got sourcing, source to pay, source to contract. We haven't quite landed on what are the definitions that mean people in the businesses really understand what it is procurement do.
So moving on then from managing or diving into managing so much in spend, you must have sat across the table from a few different vendors in your time. Maybe thinking back to IT as a category specifically, can you talk to us about how IT and generally mega vendor negotiations have evolved in the last, say, decade or so?
IT was actually, I found, one of the more difficult ones.
How come?
You talk about mega vendors, relatively few big players. If you want to do so, you want to change an ERP, you've only got 2 or 3 vendors. You are somewhat beholden to those vendors. So who has the cards if you're negotiating, working out what it is that you have as leverage. Licenses, the amount of licenses that you have quite often when you're negotiating with vendors, and it can be quite immature at times, they've got far better data on how many licenses you're using than you have. That's quite difficult. So, sitting across the table from some of them, it can be quite challenging at times. So doing your preparation, doing your homework, knowing what it is you're going to negotiate for becomes really quite important.
It's such a big problem, that knowledge gap, isn't it? And
it is.
It definitely is a thing with license counts and usage, where the vendor knows exactly who and where in your company, how they're using their software. And often the buyer doesn't have that information, or it's certainly not easily accessible in the admin dashboards. The other big thing is, of course, what a good deal looks like. And as CPO, you must have wondered what other CPOs are paying for the same stuff. What do you think of benchmarking and asking around or getting information on what other companies of a similar size industry pay for the same stuff?
I think it has its place, and every procurement function will be doing benchmarking. You can benchmark your input material costs for factory materials. You can benchmark publicly available data. It has a place. Talking to other CPOs, they're never going to tell you what they're paying.
Really?
I think you might end up with a sort of a collusion type issue if you're going to do that. But it's also around making sure you know what the right value in what you're buying for your own organization is. Because quite often there are intricacies, or if I take IT, for example, you might be in different markets. Your requirements in terms of network, cyber, might be different. So you might be a very similar organization to somebody else, but your internal requirements are different. And part of that negotiation, and I think a really important part for procurement teams is, do you understand the demand signal you're getting? Do you really understand what your organization needs? Have you had the conversation? I see procurement organizations that just get information and go and negotiate. Well, do you really understand it? Have you challenged it? Then you can go and have the conversation with the vendor. And back to the point about knowledge gap, well, now I've got knowledge that I can have a conversation around.
One thing that you mentioned benchmarking loses, right, is the context. Well, what if one company or one buyer really needs a certain piece of kit and the same piece of kit is kind of a nice to have for another organization? Well, how do you bake that into the benchmark, right? How can you have that context? It's very, very difficult. And the same with just the pricing, the unit pricing and the name of the SKUs. It's just a point in time, isn't it?
It
And
is.
especially now, we find tech as a category, software, AI, whatever you call it, is moving so quickly that yesterday's deal that might have been a good deal yesterday is not such a good deal today, and it could be a terrible deal tomorrow. Do you see that as just an increasing challenge for procurement?
I think it's one of the increasing challenges procurement has. Any benchmark is really a point in time. So you're getting a piece of information that tells you something, along with other and many other data points you might use. How you then use that, is down to the buyer and the expertise of the category managers in preparation for the negotiations. But I think your point's well made, Sergei. Is a good deal today a good deal tomorrow? You have to decide ultimately when you sign the contracts, is it a good deal? If it's a good deal, you sign it. Could it have been a better deal? Only hindsight tells you. If you take, I was at Imperial at COVID times. The contracts you signed before COVID, when COVID hit, were they a good deal? Anybody in any company who signed a contract before COVID had a good deal because suddenly prices went up, energy changed. You saw deals being, force majeure clauses being enacted. So it's a point in time.
So what's the boldest thing you've done in a vendor negotiation?
I think I walked away when they were the only supplier.
How did that end up?
Knowing that we'd have to go back, but you kind of end the negotiation just to make a point that actually we weren't going to be held over a barrel.
Was that about price, or did you walk away over something else?
It was about the commercial terms. Yeah. We were just getting nowhere. So we had to do something to break the intransigence, and actually walking away wasn't what they expected us to do.
So do you remember how it played out then? You didn't respond? You cancelled a call? How did it go?
Walked away from the meeting, stopped it, left it for a few days. They came back. We were a big client for them. They came back, wanted to talk. We talked and we got something that was a little bit more reasonable.
Yeah, but they wanted your business at the end of the day.
Yeah, but you have to test that in the negotiation. But yeah, it was a little bit challenging.
How many stakeholders were on that deal? Do you remember in the different parts of the company?
Well, it would have affected quite a lot of the markets. So there would have been quite a large group across the organization.
And how hard was it to keep that group in control? Because what can happen? The vendor can back channel. They can sort of, agree with your or accept your behavior and say, look, fully understand it. Meanwhile, they're calling someone in the business and saying, what's really going on here?
Yeah.
You know?
And it's always a challenge because they're doing that. You're trying to give your side of what's happening, but also recognizing when you do that, that might leak as well.
So no one ruined it internally?
No one ruined it.
Very good.
Yeah.
That's very hard.
It's super hard. Yeah. And one of the challenges procurement often has is managing its stakeholders. And I think that's a challenge for the profession, if I may, because procurement people typically love to negotiate with suppliers. That's why they're in the profession. They want to get a good deal for the business. I see a lot of procurement people, the first thing they do when they go and talk to a stakeholder is negotiate over a savings target, over a budget. And it's like, we're all in the same organization here. So let's just have a conversation. And I think we've got to get over the fact that quite often I hear procurement people talk about the business. We're all in the same business.
Yeah, it's a funny way of sort of separating yourself from the company, from the rest of the company.
Yeah, I get quite frustrated. I talk to a lot of procurement people nowadays, and I hear the business won't let me. What business won't let you? You're in the business. You're not separate to it. You're not some sort of third party. It is your organization.
And then it would be the same people that are wondering why they don't have a seat at the table, why they don't get asked about the strategic direction of the company.
Yeah. And I hear that a lot as well. We don't have a seat at the table. Well, nobody has a divine right to have a seat at the table. That seat is earned. And it's typically earned because you're adding value to the people that's budgets that you are influencing.
So in an ideal world for a procurement professional, the seat at the table, who else is at the table?
It depends on the table. If you're working with a market, it could be a general manager. If you're working with a function, it could be a head of function. If you're in a factory, it can be a factory leadership team. For a CPO, it could be a seat with the exec. It varies on what the spend is and what budget you're looking after. But this mythical seat at the table, it's a group of stakeholders who are looking to get outcomes from the money that they have. You need to go and have the conversations with them.
How do you get there? Do you proactively reach out and say, I want a seat at the table, or do you go about it a different way?
No. Anybody who reaches out and says, I want a seat at the table, I don't think you're going to get one. Yeah. You've got to earn that respect. And that's a procurement conversation. It's not a purchasing conversation. And by that, I mean, it's not, we talk about budgets and we talk about this procurement function looks after multi-billions. It doesn't. That multi-billion is the company's money and it's split up across departments and budgets. You need to go and have a conversation with the person whose budget it is and understand what outcomes they want for that money. Once you understand what outcomes they want for the money they're going to spend with third parties, you can start to act on that. It could be I'm looking for faster innovation. It could be I'm looking for new creative agencies. It could be I'm looking for new tech partners. I don't like the tech. I need more money for marketing. This is my budget. Can you help me save money? Those are the kind of conversations that mean you can go and help somebody get better value for the money they're spending. If you do that, they'll come back. Then you're starting to get a seat at the table.
How did you get so much influence back at your time at Imperial? Because it's so unusual for a chief procurement officer to have the whole IT org in their department. How did you get that influence within that company?
It's a good question. I don't know that I could put my finger in and say there's one thing that I did that got me the, in inverted commas, influence. I went in there knowing that we needed to build procurement. And therefore, that was going to be a lot of internal discussions. 70 to 80% of my time as the chief procurement officer was internal, working with general managers on exactly as I've just said, what are you trying to get for the money that you're spending? That progressed over about 4 years. As we built the function, we took on more influence in terms of helping the organization, and that then morphed into I went to work for our CFO who wanted similar things, as I mentioned, doing with IT, and had the same conversations with IT.
Is that usual for 70% of a CPO's time to be internal and only 30% external?
I think, again, it depends on the organization and what is needed from the procurement function. A lot of it, though, I think is, if you want procurement to be driving outcomes for the organization, you have to understand what the business is trying to achieve. That means you have to go and talk internally to stakeholders. We were a global organization. That means you're going out and we've got factories, we've got central functions like IT, we've got markets, you've got marketing, you've got corporate services, you've got all these functions, where you're having to engage.
You had something like 150 people in your team?
We started off less than that. As we built procurement, we got up to about 150, maybe even a little bit more.
Do you remember what principles you would try to instill in your team so that they would be better procurement people?
Pretty much, as I've alluded to, go and understand the stakeholders. Go and understand what it is they're trying to drive in terms of their outcomes with the money that they've got. then do good purchasing. Go and do the right negotiations. Go and drive the value through what we're going to do. I also wasn't a huge fan of the reference to internal customers. What I tried to instill with people is that we needed to be respected rather than liked. And actually, we had stakeholders, not customers. Back to this, the business, and a little bit of procurement can sometimes be seen to be subservient. I didn't want to be subservient. We wanted to have peer-to-peer conversations, which again took a little bit of time for us to get to.
When we spoke, I think last time, you told me, I hope I get this right, that you brought on a marketing person to do your marketing procurement. And that turned out to be a great idea because when they were dealing with the marketing department stakeholders, they spoke the same language.
They did.
They got on well, and it was a great success. Could you tell us about this story?
It was in Germany, where we was one of our biggest markets. We were advertising for a marketing procurement person. We had an application from a lady who'd worked in marketing, and she was fantastic. Very commercially astute as well, but not a procurement background necessarily. And actually what she was able to do was talk marketing to marketing. She didn't talk procurement to marketing. She talked marketing. She got that confidence. She got that credibility with them. And it was one of the best hires that we did. And I always viewed that having procurement as a place where people could come into from other functions, learn the commercial side of what we do as procurement people, but then go back out was a great journey for people. So if I could take more people from business areas to then sit and work with those areas to get the best value for the money, that would be a great way that we could develop procurement people. It also meant we could get movement in and out of the function, which is always healthy as well.
I love this example because at WYN, we're big believers that specialists are really, really important in procurement. The challenge often with procurement is, right, that you're expected to be, a know-it-all about different categories, different vendors within the category. Yes, in big companies, those negotiating real estate don't typically negotiate with Microsoft and Oracle as well. But even take software as a category, that's made up of hundreds of vendors. And how can you be expected to know, as a procurement professional, as much about SAP as someone who's selling only SAP? They don't sell 500 different software platforms, do they? The salesperson only is selling one, so they can become a real expert in that thing. But the procurement side has to be somehow an expert in every single vendor. Otherwise, you come back to that knowledge gap, and it's an imperfect transaction between the buyer and the seller.
Yeah. And I think we should, just a personal view, start to see a shift, because you're absolutely spot on. Procurement functions, they're a finite cost to a business. Yeah. And you can't keep holding costs to cover every eventuality. And actually the use of a variable cost, bringing in like a WYN, actually I think has got a real place now in procurement. And I've seen it in Imperial. We bought it in FM. We brought in an FM specialist at the time. You're starting to see it in fleet, for example, where with grants, with EV schemes, with manufacturer knowledge, there are specialists that people will bring in at contract renewal time on a variable basis to deliver specific outcomes. And I think tech is going to be a big area of opportunity where somebody like WYN has a real place that you can augment the internal resources with the specialist knowledge to drive business value-adding outcomes. For WYN, it's great. You've got the real expertise, and for organizations, they don't have the fixed costs of doing that. They can bring you in to deliver that knowledge and to deliver the benefit that I'm sure WYN customers are seeing.
Well, I hope you're not just saying that, because I'm sitting here. We definitely see a massive surge in demand in the last couple of years, partially driven by the fact that tech is becoming so unpredictable and so fast moving. You have vendors that change their business model between renewal cycles. So you're using a bunch of products, they come back to you at renewal, the whole thing has changed. There's a move now from seat-based pricing which is predictable and fairly obvious in what it means for an enterprise, now to usage-based, credit-based, outcomes-based, and hybrids of different things. So I think the complexity of tech is definitely screaming out for specialist knowledge, but also just procurement, as many departments are understaffed and they wish they had more resource. And you end up focusing on maybe your top 20% of vendors, and then the mid to long tail is largely left to their own devices.
Yes and no. I'd hope that it's not. You've got to have different ways of dealing with that last 20% because you're not going to be able to cover everything all of the time. Also, I think procurement functions we talk about AI a lot nowadays, and the advent of AI and incorporation of AI, and you've just tokens and things like that. We've got to find different models because also procurement people in organizations, do they have the time to be reinventing themselves to deal with this tech revolution? Maybe, but not on a wholesale basis, which is where I think the kind of variable fractional model really has a place to play in a procurement organization of the future.
You brought up AI. What do you think about AI and how it's going to change procurement as a profession?
It's interesting. I spoke to a vendor who said, this procurement thing, it's all a load of rubbish because in the future we're going to have a sales bot that's going to negotiate with the procurement bot and it'll all be AI driven.
Yeah, I've met people like that as well.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I don't think it's necessarily true. I think there's going to be a place for some of that, but there's still an element of human intellect around understanding what the business needs out of that negotiation. I think some of the things that procurement functions do today, absolutely AI can help. Scouting for new suppliers, financial checks, credit checks. Some of those information gathering, AI has a place. Contracts, AI has a place. But I think we've still got to see the best use cases play out. People are doing all sorts of things at the moment. I think it's about you've got to find the right use case for the right business you're in as well.
What's the AI going to do if the vendor CRO goes out for dinner with your CEO? What's the AI going to do then?
Well, you'll probably have a transcript of the dinner conversation. You can put it into AI and it'll create the strategy for you. They'll then go and negotiate.
Everyone's just wearing a wire at this point, feeding back to their bots.
Yeah.
Goodness. I mean, do you see the bot versus bot negotiation happening more, maybe at least in the lower value contracts? Because, I mean, the buying experience of I guess, off-the-shelf software, if it's not an enterprise purchase, you just go on the website and you click, right? You never talk to a salesperson. You still, though, are a human usually that's doing the buying and putting your credit card details in. Do you see bot versus bot negotiations being a thing, maybe at least in the lower level transactions, or you still can't see that happening so much?
I think at the lower level, you might see two things. You might see things like Amazon for Business or the broad cataloging, where people can you can automate a lot of that. Now, whether you call that a bot, I'm not sure. But I think if you're buying vanilla type software products, bots could do that. If you're buying complicated enterprise solutions, I'm not sure that a bot or AI is going to do that for you. I think AI will help, but still understanding the complexities of your business, understanding the cycles, the rollout plans. If you're doing an ERP, are you really going to leave that to AI? I don't think so.
Well, I just can't see CFOs relinquishing multi-million-dollar negotiations to an AI.
No.
I just don't see it.
They want some sort of confidence.
Control, relationship, does that play into it?
You've got governance as well. So if you're spending this, typically you'll have spend thresholds or you have limits, things need to be auditable. So you've got to have all these trails. And you're right, CFOs will want confidence. CPOs should want confidence that actually the spend has been through a rigorous process. If it's an ERP implementation, these are massive multi-year programs. You want to have all the documented trails. You want to understand that you've got a good deal from the vendors, that the vendors have brought their A team, which is typically what happens when you negotiate for ERPs. You want to understand who's going to be helping with implementation. Well, I don't want to see a bot. You want to know the people that are going to be in your business on the ground helping design it. So I still think there's a place in those big deals for that to happen. Smaller ones, possibly, yeah.
Did you think it was a helpful or unhelpful thing if your, say, CEO was buddies with the vendor exec?
It could be both.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, I've worked for a number of organizations through my career, and sometimes that relationship can be healthy in unlocking value. It can be unhealthy if it influences what you're trying to achieve by looking at a panel of vendors. So, and I think that's incumbent upon the CPO to manage, whether it's a CEO, a CFO, marketing director, factory director, whoever it is. In these relationships exist, they're never not going to exist because that's business. Understand the stakeholder, have credibility in the discussions, and make sure you're independent when you go and negotiate with the vendors.
Personally, I lean on the side of it's unhelpful. I know it can be done to the benefit of the buying organization, but usually what we've seen in negotiations is that the CEO or the CFO of the buying organization has gone out to dinner with, I don't know, Salesforce or something. Salesforce are a great example of a company that does divide and conquer, and they'll want separate relationships within a business so that come time to purchase or renew, everyone's already kind of committed themselves to the vendor in various ways over a bottle of red wine. And usually it is a recipe for losing a lot of leverage and sort of like weird sort of side door deals that have already taken place.
Yeah, and that can happen. And I think part of that is the CPO as the most senior procurement person, understanding the business environment they're in and had organizations that have had Salesforce. And I think there were 15 different versions of Salesforce across a whole different series of countries where Salesforce had sold different things, which is great for them. Part of that procurement role, though, is to understand what the relationship looks like in totality and try and bring it together in one consolidated discussion and not have those fragmented bottle of wine conversations that, well, this country, we need this because we're different. Not sure that you're different. We need to make sure that we're having the right conversations. So I take your point. It can be helpful sometimes in unlocking things. But if it's unhealthy, that can be damaging and a real challenge.
Nick, moving on from your time as CPO to your time as interim CEO of SIPS.
Yeah.
Anyone in procurement should know SIPS.
I hope so.
SIPS has, 60,000 odd members?
Maybe a little bit more now, maybe 65, I think.
That is a lot of lives and careers to have some sort of influence and impact on. When you were inside that organization, what did you learn about the profession and its members that maybe you didn't know before?
I think the one thing that I really learned is that we need a voice in the profession. And SIPS was trying to be, and the work that Ben Farrell is now doing as the incumbent CEO, trying to drive the organization forward, is really valuable. We're not a license to practice as a profession. We're not like a doctor. We're not like a lawyer. So people can come into the profession, claim they're procurement people, and just do what they want. So the profession needs that voice, and we need to get not necessarily procurement people, but we need to get CFOs, CEOs, HR directors recognizing there is a value in the profession and actually looking to try and get people accredited through it, because that comes with the credibility that you wouldn't go and see a doctor who you don't think's been, not been to medical school. Well, why would you entrust multi-billions to a procurement function that hasn't got an accreditation? So I saw a lot of the requirement for actually trying to elevate the profession and make it something where actually that license to practice has, whether we actually ever get there, but there is a real desire to have people who've been through a procurement training and been through an education can prove they actually understand what to do.
Do you think that license to practice thing is a good idea in general for procurement?
I do, yeah, because I think it will mean you can elevate the standards for people. It also means that for young people who probably don't think of procurement as a career, because let's face it, I don't know very many young people who leave school and want to go and be a procurement person.
That doesn't happen much.
It doesn't. But if you had a license to practice, if it gave you a qualification, that qualification meant something to an employer, that becomes quite interesting for a young person. So actually, I've come out of school, or I come out of an apprenticeship, and I take on a qualification in procurement, and it means I can get access to jobs. And the procurement surveys that SIPS run show that qualified procurement people get better salaries. Well, actually, the more we can promote that, the more we get a next generation of younger people coming into the profession. That can only be good.
Speaking of younger people, Andy Burnham, new Prime Minister of the UK, has come in the other day, and pretty soon after his arrival has already started speaking about changing the education system in the country, putting an end to what he will say, university being the only good path to a good career, introducing new vocational training, technical pathways. Do you see these reforms, if they happen, influencing procurement as a career?
I don't know very many procurement degrees. So you're not going to go to university right now and have wholesale procurement degrees. So if I just look at procurement, I'm not sure if that will influence it or not, because it's not the natural current pathway for people to get into procurement. If we can do more for young people to educate them on careers in procurement, however that looks, I think that must be a good thing. Because how much do we spend? Billions and billions. Well, having good qualified people who want to be in the profession to get the best value, whether that's public sector or private sector, that can only be a good thing.
Would this be in the form of apprenticeships in procurement teams? So companies who have a procurement department, they will take people on at 16 or 18, whatever it is. Those people don't go to university. They go straight into a procurement apprenticeship. They have an amazing career. They change the trajectory of their family, maybe.
Yeah, and I know that when I was at SIPS, SIPS helped with apprenticeships, so they do exist. They're just not widely publicised. Again, so anything that can promote the profession, whether it's apprenticeships, whether it's degrees, whether it's just on-the-job training. Say I got into it because I did a year out of university, didn't know what this purchasing thing was, but hey, go and give it a go. The more we can do that, then I think that's only a good thing. And hopefully it means that we spend better, public and private sector. We get more value for the money that we're spending, which means that we can do more good with the money that we get back.
I'm being ignorant, and I maybe should know this, but procurement entry-level roles, do they still mostly require a degree?
I'm being ignorant now. I'm not sure. I would doubt that they specify degree.
Should they?
I don't think they should specify degree, if I'm honest.
I think so either.
It's more about your aptitude, your desire to want to work in the profession. You need to be moderately numerate, because we work with numbers in procurement. But I don't see a degree being the threshold to get into procurement. That shouldn't be the case.
Apart from being numerate, what other qualities do you think are necessary to be an amazing procurement professional?
Curious. You need to be curious.
About what?
Well, just accepting somebody wants to buy we're in London, a red bus. Why do you want the red bus? What are you going to do with it? How many people are you actually looking to have? You've got to be curious in terms of what people are aiming to achieve, because part of procurement's role is to have the conversation, to challenge. If you're not curious, all you're going to do is take what people ask you to do, go and negotiate, think you've done a great job. Have you? So that curiosity for me is important.
Even though I never formally worked in procurement, I've come from sales. And the whole point of WYN is that we give sales knowledge to procurement. I really relate to the fact that procurement is a profession most people just fall into, because it's the same with sales a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Kids at school, at uni, they rarely talk about, I want to go into sales, or I want to go into tech sales. It's changing a little bit now, but probably by the time going into sales or tech sales becomes sort of the consensus, it's going to be too late, right? It's going to be because there's years of delay between when something is an awesome career and then the school and university system sort of reacting to it. But I really relate to just the falling into a career, the lack of professional accreditation or license to practice, because you might get accredited or certified, but anyone can say I'm a salesperson.
Yeah.
And that can be an amazing thing and a terrible thing.
Yeah. And quite often it comes with a job title as well. I'm a procurement person. I'm a category manager. Okay. But what is it you're actually doing for the organization that you're in?
Do you think category management is a good way to segment procurement?
I've never been a fan of the title category management. I mean,
Why not?
It was born out of, I think how marketing used to determine what it did, and it had categories. Procurement functions are very good at boxing categories in a taxonomy that suits them, as opposed to how is the organization that you're in managing its spend. And we talk about we must do category management. Well, what we've really got to do is get outcomes for the spend that we've got, and we put category strategies in. And I've seen organizations, they write wonderful category strategies and they sit in a desk drawer because tech moves really quickly. So you spend 6 months writing a category strategy, you sign it off, and next month, Claude arrives on the scene. So, we talk a lot about category management, strategic sourcing. They're phrases. We've just got to understand what our businesses are doing and respond with high-quality procurement and conversations that look at demand from the money we've got and outcomes that we need to deliver through third parties.
Do you have an opinion on when the first procurement person should be hired in an organization? We're a startup. There's 20 plus of us in the core team. We don't have full-time procurement people yet to manage our own spend, right? Companies around 500, 1,000 typically start having them. When do you think, at what size should a company bring on their first procurement person?
I think that depends on the company, but my question back to you would be, how are you managing and controlling the spend that WYN have?
Very good question. Well, the reality is that we are immature internally about the things that we want our customers to be really mature about, right? We don't have a dedicated tool, say like an orchestration or source to pay or whatever you call it. We still will manage it through spreadsheets for ourselves. And it works for us because we're not a large company. But then the question will definitely come where you look at your spreadsheet or whatever it is and you think, wow, this thing's out of date. We don't even have that thing anymore.
Yeah.
The new thing, who forgot to put that in? So it can definitely become a problem, but I just don't know, at what point you'd appoint someone whose full-time job it is to look after this stuff.
I think you might have to change the mindset. I was talking to a few people, and the rise of the fractional. Mm-hmm. I've seen this with you fractional CFOs. As businesses grow, I think the rise of fractional procurement people will happen.
Is that a good thing?
I think it's a good thing, as long as they're SIPS qualified.
Got it.
You could then, organizations can then tap into that expertise to make sure that you're getting best value. You're helping organizations get better value for their money. You could get people on a fractional basis to ensure that you're getting good value for the money that you spend. So I don't think it's 500 people or it's 1,000 people. It's what needs to be right for the business. And I think there are ways that you can do that without having to say, I've got to invest in a person, because you're in that staircase of you invest, that's a cost. Well, the business then has to sell more to recover the cost of that person. I think we're in a different world from just hiring full-time people nowadays.
Oh, I think that's a good idea, and I can see us getting to that point where even a day, a week, someone to come in and do the work. Maybe then it becomes 2, 3, 4, and then it becomes a full-time job. I could see that.
Yeah.
Very good. So let's move on to what you're focusing on these days. You have what they call a portfolio career now, right?
I do.
Where you do a bunch of different things, and you're particularly involved in startups and social value. Could you tell us what social value means?
So if you think about ESG, which companies are very familiar with, that's typically a risk and compliance type thing. You're complying. Social value is all about when we spend money, how much social value we're creating for the communities that we're spending that money in. So, are we employing apprentices? Are we when we do construction projects? Are we using local workforce? Are we using materials that are locally sourced? How many training hours are we giving to our people? Are ex-offenders being employed to create social value? So it really is about creating that social value from the spend that we've got. That then moves into the social impact that has on communities where we all live and where we work.
How did you get into this stuff?
I guess it was twofold. So I'm a non-exec for a business called Social Value Portal, which we're all about social value. We have a methodology that helps organizations measure their social value and their social impact. But I guess that came about partly because when I was at Imperial, I had tobacco leaf under me as one of the categories. And I went out to some of the tobacco growing countries in Africa. And you see, and I saw firsthand, you put a well into a community, the benefit that has for that local community, and we could help do that. Or you build houses for workers. And it really was quite profound when you see it. So that, how do you use the money, because we've got billions and billions being spent. How do we use it to drive social value in the communities and our workplaces?
So what do you want the new generation of procurement to do differently than it's done before?
Think of itself as part of the business that they're in and be curious to ask the questions. Don't just go and negotiate for the sake of negotiating. The best pound that people save is the pound that doesn't get spent. So I'd say go and talk to your stakeholders, not your customers. Be curious about what they're trying to deliver with their outcomes and have respected conversations with them. Don't just accept and be liked.
When it comes to mentorship or, what we talked about, the new generation maybe of people who are going to have a different educational experience than what you did or what I did, are there things that you actually want to be changed nationally on a structural level that will help the new generation of procurement people?
I don't know it's national or structural. I think there are opportunities for people who've had careers and experience to mentor and help give back. When you've had a long career, you've seen a lot of things, whether that's nationally, globally, culturally, organizationally, sector-wise. And a lot of that experience, I think, can be valuable. Not trying to tell people, but you've probably done a lot of things that can help guide the next generation. And I think there's a lot of people with a lot of experience out there that can perhaps help the next generation with thoughts and views.
So before we wrap up today, I want to play a game which is called Howl or Growl, right? This is related to Win the Wolf, who's our mascot. Howl basically means that you agree with it. You think this is a kind of green flag. Growl is more of a red flag. And I'm going to read out some statements or scenarios, and you, putting your procurement hat back on, will tell me if it's a howl or a growl. It's usually going to be something that a vendor would say.
Okay.
Do you have any questions before we start?
Let's start. I'm just need to make sure I remember which way round it is, but let's go.
Absolutely. Howl is good, growl is bad.
Okay.
So the first one is, this is our best and final offer.
Growl.
Why?
Best and final offer. Are they really going to say? They will always say it's the best and final offer, but really, is it the best and final offer? I wouldn't just accept that's the best and final.
After how many rounds did you usually see vendors throw that phrase in?
It could vary. It might be the first round.
Really?
Yeah, this is the best and final.
Take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it. Yeah. It could be 4 or 5 rounds. There was no kind of standard to it.
Do you remember which kind of vendors, if there was a pattern or something in common about those who would say it right at the beginning?
Yeah, I probably can't name them, but there was a certain category in one of the industries I worked in where there were relatively few global vendors.
Bit monopolistic.
You could say that.
Say?
Yeah, and that would quite often come out very quickly.
Next one is, we match any competitor's price. Just show us the quote.
Growl. Yeah, we're not going to show you the quote. That's a real red flag.
Have vendors asked for that?
Yeah.
Is that just being naive, or they genuinely think?
I think partly sometimes it's naive, partly desperation. Yeah. A variation on that is just tell me the price I've got to quote.
What do you think of that behavior?
Desperation. Yeah, because the price, right, well, it was £10. Tell me the price, it's £1. But knowing full well, you tell them you're going to quote £1. If they quote £1, there's no way they're going to be able to make any money on that. So I think it's a bit of a naive and desperation play.
When you would negotiate with vendors, or your team would negotiate with vendors, can you sometimes go too far and push too hard?
Of course. Yeah.
Where do you draw the line?
How do you mean, where do you draw the line?
I guess an example would be that just give it to me for £1 then. If you said name your price, why don't you sell it to me for £1?
Yeah, and that would be a very facetious throwaway. You're not going to, well, I think you'd be stupid then to take it for £1 because the differential between the £10 is just so big, nobody was ever going to do it for £1. And if they are, they're just losing so much money. So I think you've got to understand, it's back to that knowledge. You've got to know what your likely price is going to be, what you want for that price in terms of the value, and how close are you going to get to that. Sometimes you can beat it, and that's great. If it's 50 or 60% different, I think you've really got to question what are the motives.
Next one is, our AI-powered platform will transform your business.
Oh, growl.
Oh, we can't make them all growls. Well, I guess it's my fault.
I had a howl on the first one.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, your AI platform transforming my business. Well, you might know my business, but you can't make a statement like that just in isolation. I think there's got to be a discussion about what is it going to transform. Is it going to transform a manufacturing site? Is it going to if you're financial services, is it going to make your back office more efficient? What is it going to transform? The danger is AI becomes this catch-all for everything, as opposed to what is it really going to transform?
What do you think of when sales reps put business cases together about ROI and stuff like that?
I've always listened to them, read them.
That's good. Not everybody does.
No, because if they've taken the time to do it, they've obviously thought about, well, nowadays they probably use AI to do it, but they've probably thought about it. So it's always interesting to see, because there might be something in that is a valuable discussion to have with them.
Is there something that you believe actually is a howl that other people think is a growl? Think of something maybe a bit controversial that you actually believe in, that other people in your maybe experience don't think it's a good idea.
I think I'd go back to what I said earlier on. I would be a huge advocate of hiring non-procurement people into procurement. Bring people with subject matter expertise, not necessarily procurement expertise, and that will probably create a huge growl from some of the procurement fraternity who believe that you've got to be a buyer and you've got to negotiate, and then you become a senior buyer and a category manager. That subject matter knowledge for me was something that was really important, really valuable. I could then educate them about the procurement bits. So which way around do you have procurement people you try and educate on SME, or do you have SMEs you educate on procurement people? I found having an SME that could talk, as I said, marketing was hugely valuable. So that would be something I would really push.
And lastly, is there something you wish I'd asked you that I didn't?
No, I think you've asked me everything I could imagine you would ask me.
Really?
Yeah,
so
but it's been a pleasure.
Nothing further to add? You've said it all.
I could sit here for hours and talk, Sergei, but I think we probably have covered quite a lot.
Very good. And we're right on time. Last time we finished, I think, on 60 point something. Now we've got 59:53. So there's something about the hour mark that
procurement people
that works. Very good. Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sergei.
We'll see you again soon.
Will do.
Stay cool.
We'll try to in this heat.